All right, folks, it's Rob for Central Apologetics, and I'm live here with my good old friend Joel. How you doing, Joel?
I'm hanging in there. I'm doing okay.
Especially considering you're about to discuss the what I've titled the Paleobabble Eisegesis by Wieners Style, right? So,
That's a very creative title. I applaud that.
so um, just a bit of background how I met Joel. Actually, Joel and I debated once. Would we
What?
say we debated like 2017,
Yeah,
2018?
like 5 years ago or
Yeah,
so, at least. Yeah.
and it was back then. It was through a Facebook group
hmm
that some dude, which I don't think we've even met him. Like I don't
Yeah, he
think
just kind of
since
called
we,
us up and said, "Hey, would you like to do this debate
and then he
about
just disappeared as well.
Noah's flood?" And it was us
Yeah,
and another person who gave her opinion, and it's probably still
yeah.
somewhere on the internet somewhere.
I
So,
have the transcripts, but
oh,
yours
you
and
do?
mine are not hers.
Yeah, yeah, that
So
was.
yeah.
I wonder why.
um, yeah. So anyway, so Joel and I debated the flood issue. Joel took, I suppose, like a Walton, position. So I
Yeah, but
became
basically,
more,
my
yeah.
position with that and all of Genesis 1 through 11 is I
Mm,
emphasize genre wise. You have to see it in the genre of ancient Near Eastern myth, and then you have to understand. Therefore, it's not trying to make historical scientific claims. You have to read it in that genre and understand what the theological teachings are. Um,
mm,
but whether or not there was a literal flood, I think my opinion is like yeah, it's irrelevant
yeah.
to the message of the text.
But I've definitely, like, since that debate, you know,
Yeah.
I've I've also grown exponentially. Like I
hmm
was working with the cutting edge stuff I knew at the time, but I was going obviously from that concordance route,
Yep.
and now I've softened up a lot more
Yeah.
to
Well,
pump the brakes on the concordism and just like I'm
yeah.
I'm still concordist, but at the same time falling in
It's
love
not
even more
essential.
so
Yeah.
with yeah
Yeah.
with yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things. The problem with the concordist approach is that it has this assumption that we have to make it scientifically provable, or it's not true. Like, well, not if it's not meant to be interpreted that way to begin with. I mean, there's certain things in
Mm,
the Bible that are presented as history, and you take them as history, and you could argue,
hmm.
make arguments. Other things, not so much, and that's okay. you know, doesn't mean it's not true. It just means maybe it's in a kind of genre that I'm not familiar with, and I need to learn, like the Book of Revelation. You know,
Hmm. Hmm.
so most people
I wonder
today
what.
don't understand apocalyptic literature, so they interpret it like the Tim LaHaye Left Behind series. So
So I
anyway, go
wonder
ahead.
what uh, God and anatomy, how that will be reviewed by historians 500 years by now. What
I don't
genre
know.
do we place that book in?
I don't know. I
Speaking of genre.
in the big picture, like so many books are written, 500 years from now, most of everything written today won't even be remembered. There'll be a few that'll be, but but
But will
yeah,
there ever be? This is the one time when biblical scholarship not only went woke but bonkers.
that's the whole thing that led me to read the book. I mean, I guess I
Hmm.
think I give a little bit of the backstory. And incidentally, the reason why I'm being interviewed right now is because I wrote a 10-part book analysis of the book,
Hmm.
God and Anatomy. And the reason why I did it is it was, I think, early February. Um, I won't get into the names and stuff because
Hmm.
one online TikTok scholar who I will say is probably pretty progressively liberal. He made this little TikTok video about how this other guy had said this horribly misogynistic comment about Professor, is it Professor or Doctor Stavrakopoulou? I said I call her
Well, she's
S.
she's she's a professor, so
Okay,
yeah,
it all
yeah,
kind of depends on which one you
hmm,
call. Um,
yeah.
and they were making such a big deal about how this one guy was being so misogynistic. And I really, you see stuff on Twitter and you just kind of whatever, but this just went on for days. And so I made one comment about how it's like, yeah, what he said was bad. It's not but World War III. You guys are overreacting. And then all of them
Mm.
just like pointed their Twitter guns at me and started calling me a bunch of stuff. And I'm like, I agree with it. It wasn't a good thing to say. But because of that, because they were so riled up, it made me think, I kind of want to read what this book is and see what it's about. and and so I read it, and oh my gosh, I was just...
Because I like his style.
Yeah.
For example, you've reviewed, say, Heiser's works. Like,
yep.
I like his style,
Yeah.
That's why I actually got along with you very well. Like, just coming back to that flood debate, just so that the folks know, you and I did keep in contact here and there.
Mm-hmm.
I subscribed to your blog because I actually didn't disagree with you. For example, during that debate, you actually had a lot of very nice, sort of straightforward, just cutting to the chase, sort of like, this shouldn't really hinder your faith whatsoever. So I like his style, and yeah, your Twitter posts was such that you're just like, hang on, I didn't read this in grad school.
Yeah, that was one of the things. Like, one of the first things I read early, as I was reading through the book. Dave, did you read the book, right? God and Anatomy.
That's why I'm still in the process of reviewing it, like a very detailed review.
Stylistically, the problem I had with it is because it just jumped around. There was the structure of it, torso, body, foot. It was that it goes along with her God and Anatomy, idea. But as far as making any consistent, coherent argument, it just jumped around, and it was hard to follow. But then, like a few chapters into it, when she's got into making some interpretive claims, for example, we'll just jump into the crazy one, the one that got me in trouble on Twitter. She wrote that in Isaiah 6, when Isaiah has his vision of Yahweh in the temple, in the year King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on the throne, and in most translations, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. And I'm reading this, and she's like, well, actually, that word means penis. And it just struck me, like, you're saying the text is telling us that God's penis filled the temple. And I'm like, my first question is, how does that fit in with the context of what is being said? Why? If you're going to make a unique interpretive claim, you should have an argument of how that fits into the context of what is being presented in the text. And it just seems so random that I think I took to Twitter and I said something kind of cheeky. I'm like, hey, wow, God's penis filled the temple in Isaiah 6. How did I miss that in grad school? And all of a sudden, all these people who love her book just started savaging me. And I was like, I couldn't even get mad when they were attacking me, because I was like, really? You're going to defend that? Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't believe it. And there was a few others, but yeah, that's what started. That's what got me reading the book, is because the hubbub over this one other guy's comment, and then just the way they immediately attacked me on many levels, just for, I think, rightly going, hey, that's a weird interpretation there. They weren't even self-aware enough to go, okay, we understand that does sound kind of out there. But here's why we're convinced that they didn't do that at all. They just immediately jumped in to accuse me of everything under the sun, which, again, was kind of funny. But
all right, so what we're going to do is we're going to get into it, like maybe in a deductive approach, what you've written. But before we do that, this is part of my introduction to my review of her work. So this is just a screenshot of the introduction. I'm going to do a very detailed analysis, possibly even in video form. I'm writing up a transcript on, chapter by chapter. I think your blog posts are going to be like excellent sort of, I wouldn't say surface level reading. You have your gift is that you dig in and then you bring it to the surface.
Yeah.
Instead of just doing a surface review. Like you've actually dug in and you're choosing the choice stuff to bring up to the surface. Whereas everyone on Sentinel knows I like to go into the weeds with, the bibliography. And all right, so in summary, this is what she argues in her book. So basically, God of the Old Testament walks with Enoch, Noah, and Abraham, talks to Moses and the prophets, appears to Ezekiel and Isaiah, sniffs, snorts, gulps, and gasps during these interactions. So in other words, according to Stavrakopoulou, all the physical characteristics of a human body is attributed to Yahweh at some point in the Old Testament, including the heart, liver, sex, and defecation.
Mm-hmm.
Thus, here is her summary of Yahweh's ontological form, which is at the epilogue of her book.
Yeah.
A supersized human-shaped body with male features and shining ruddy red skin. His biceps bulge, his forearms are hard as iron, his penis is long, thick, and carefully circumcised. His testicles are heavy with semen.
Yeah.
So...
I think it's just so obvious to anybody who's ever read the Bible. That's clearly there.
So obvious, right?
So we might be thinking, how did she get to that conclusion? Because I'm guessing a lot of people have tried to read the Bible at times, and a lot of people have read most of the Bible. I never came to that conclusion. So how do you get to that point? And what I said in, I think at the beginning of my critique is, when it gets right down to it, is the way she gets to that point to argue that there's a fundamental view of the Bible that she has that I don't agree with, and I think a lot of people don't agree with. And it's the way I could put it is like when I was in grad school, it was always emphasized in all my interpretation and exegesis classes is that the goal is to get to a clear understanding of the final form of the text that we have. So that's always been my focus. What does the text we have? So, for example, on a side note, like in New Testament studies, when they talk about the synoptic problem, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and you could speculate, and you can tell when you compare those texts that it does seem that Mark was probably the original text, and Matthew and Luke borrowed from Mark, but then got their stuff from their other information from somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Fine. And when you do that, then you compare Matthew, Mark, and Luke at certain passages. You can see the slight differences, and that gives you a clue to what each author is emphasizing in his given gospel. Bring it back to the final form of the text. But when you would get some people and some scholars then to speculate about Q and what's the theology of Q and all these other sources beyond, like, those are hypothetical, speculative sort. There is no gospel of Q. It does not exist. You could say there's Q material, but when you start trying to study Q, you're not studying Q because Q doesn't exist. And so I find when you go into that kind of route, it gets kind of bonkers to me. And the same thing goes for the Old Testament, which I think she does. She comes to the final form of the text and she just starts right off. Like, I can't trust the final form of the text because it has undergone revision and all the stuff, which it has, it use sources, whatnot. And therefore, I'm not even going to try to understand the final form of the text. I'm going to try to get behind it. And what was Yahweh? What did ancient Israelites really believe of Yahweh? Because the final form isn't what it is, because I don't trust that. Mm-hmm. So when she throws out that context, what she has left is she compares everything against the backdrop of, other ancient Near Eastern cultures and mythologies. And again, there's a place for that, because ancient Israel was part of the ancient Near East. They're going to use similar language and whatnot. But but she forgoes the context of the text we have, and she interprets everything in light of other ancient Near Eastern cultures because she has a preconceived assumption that there was nothing unique about the ancient Israelite culture. It was just like everything else. So therefore, when you look at other ancient Near Eastern mythologies on how they viewed their gods, they were highly hypersexualized, all that stuff. That's where she's getting it from. So that paragraph that you quoted isn't really how Yahweh in the Old Testament is portrayed.
Mm-hmm.
It's how the other ancient Near Eastern gods are portrayed. And in her mind, she's thinking, and Yahweh's just like them. So therefore, that's what I'm going to say.
And not just that, in the first temple, potentially they have like a Yahweh statue with exactly these features. Oh, close enough, I suppose.
Well, that's what she claimed. Yeah.
But there's no evidence for that.
Yeah. There's nothing.
Yeah.
And the way she gets around it throughout the book, she'll point out to like, like in the Ten Commandments, for example, when it says don't worship graven idols and blah 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 blah. Well, therefore, the fact that they emphasize that shows that they really did worship graven idols. And you're like, well, yes, some of them did. Some of them did. That was in the ancient world, in ancient Israel. You had some clearly who treated Yahweh like just any other ancient Near Eastern god. Yeah, that's true. In the Old Testament, we get that from the prophets. That's what they're critiquing, But at the same time, there was also an element in ancient Near Eastern, ancient Israel that viewed Yahweh as wholly unique and different. The temple, all that stuff. Just like in any culture, here in America, you have the wide swath of American Christianity. Not everybody agrees. You get some weird views here and there. And I don't know how anybody could think that in the ancient world that it was any different. Any culture you go to, you're going to have people under the banner of Christians or Israelites. You're going to have different views, but it's not all one or the other. But in the book, she has this view that ancient Israel was all polytheistic, pagan, ancient Near Eastern, and then the monotheistic view of God only came after the exile. It was like this, then this, not they were both coincided together throughout their history, which seems to me a lot more common sense because you get that in any culture, But
I'll quickly, based on everything you just said there, again, by the way, guys, just so everyone knows, this interview and this dialogue on this is impromptu in some sense. Because Joel has just finished his part 10, his last. Would that be your last part on her book, or maybe down the track you may? Okay.
No, I'm done. After 6 weeks of going through that book, I'm tapped out.
So it's we're just sort of winging it, but that's fine because Joel and I have read through the book, and so we're sort of free flowing here. But so that being said, and I love that style of interview because we bring up stuff in the moment. And right now, based on what Joel just said there, I want to share this quickly from a favorite commentary of mine on Exodus. It's a recent Kriegel publication commentary by Dwayne Garrett, 2014 publication. In regards to Exodus 3:14, this is how he translates verse 14. Well, starting with verse 13, Moses asks this being that he encounters, which, by the way, a little tongue-in-cheek moment. If God has a body, well, this time he has twigs, right? And this is meant to be pre the anthropomorphic human supersized body that is presumably tucked away down in the layerings of this this redacted form, right? So anyway, but he translates verse 14 very interestingly, and I think especially from that ancient Egyptian polemic, this bit is very interesting, which is something that Francesca doesn't at all. She just doesn't interact with this type of scholarship in her book. So Moses asks, "What is his name?" So if they say to me, "What is his name?" what do I say to them? And God said to Moses, "This is who I am. I am." Now, there are translations that render it differently. Obviously, the famous King James rendering renders it differently. But grammatically, you can actually render it this way. Like it's a sort of a saying, well, this is who I am. And then the answer is, I am. And say this to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. Now, why does Duane go down that route? So this is what he says. And this is connected to this interaction with the book. So he goes, in short, what is his name implies a specific set of presuppositions about the deity whom Moses will claim to represent. It suggests that he is not unique, but one of many gods. That, by the way, he's building up a case. He's not saying that this is who God is, but just that question, like what is his name, suggests that he's not unique, but one of many gods.
Right.
That he is geographically limited to a special place or cult. That he has certain areas of specialization, whether it be making babies or ruling over the dead. And it suggests that Yahweh is somewhere in the hierarchy of deities, with some gods above and some gods below him, which, by the way, that's exactly the way she interprets Deuteronomy 32, verse 8, that El Elyon is above Yahweh in verse 9.
Right.
In short, his name is a way to distinguish him from all the other gods in the pantheon. It is in this light that we must understand the answer in verse 14, I am. Although God will accept the name Yahweh, the title I am, set against the pagan context of the question, rejects the very idea of a name for God. He is not like Amun or Ptah. He cannot be assigned a place and identity in the cosmos as one of the gods. In the most ultimate sense, he has no name. He is simply I am. Furthermore, the title I am implies that he is not a contingent being. This is not an insertion of an alien philosophical theology into the text, which, by the way, that's what she tries to argue in her book, that by the time you reach Platonic ideas and so on, that, oh, look, see, you're softening away the anthropomorphic nature of the text. So it is germane to the point that the text makes. His identity is not tied to any shrine, cult, city, people, or title. His powers are not limited to specific activities such as the scribal art or the annual inundation of the Nile. He is not even contingent upon the primeval forces that, in pagan theogony, preceded the births of the gods. He exists independently of all things and is the only being for whom existence is part of his essence. Everything, which, by the way, the very fact that we have something as ancient as Exodus 3 in the text, well, notice that, well, ergo, how ironic, that's why you have the Christian concept of the, that, like Colossians 1:15, he's the Son is the prototokos, he's the preeminent one, or and also the image of the invisible deity, right? Like Romans 1:20 and 21, like when we look at creation, we can somehow infer God's invisible attributes. So that type of theology is ironically driven by the fact that you have the text that is over a millennium earlier, just presenting this being who claims to be the I am. Because see, let me just bring it back to this. So when God says, "This is who I am," but then you as a listener, you're like, "I am what?"
No.
Because for example, I am Seth, I am thought, right? I am.
Right. He's
like, I am.
Yeah.
But what? Okay, finish the sentence, right? So, but that's the point. So, and to bring it back to this again. So, he exists independently of all the things and is the only being for whom existence is part of his essence. Everything else is contingent on him. In simplest terms, he is the one, eternal, all-powerful creator God. So to ask his name is to miss the point completely, because he is not one of the gods at all. All right.
Yeah. And
that was, by the way, that was published in 2014. And that's right in line with the latest scholarship at the time, like utilizing Hofmeier's work with the the polemics with Egypt. She just does not interact with this sort of thing whatsoever. And yet Mark Smith, she cites Mark Smith, who is, I suppose you could say, of the liberal strand, but I like his works as well. And even he disagrees with, not direct, like he doesn't talk to her directly. It's just that his works disagree with her, and she doesn't even interact with his works directly. Well, and that's
Yeah, that's the problem, is that a lot of the stuff that disagrees with her, she just kind of, I'm just gonna ignore it as if it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
But even with stuff like that, and with virtually anything you see in the Old Testament that emphasizes how Yahweh is uniquely different, she just simply chalks it up to, oh, that's a later, she didn't say it this way, but it's later scribal gloss from the post-exilic period to try to cover up. It's like, well, how do you argue with that? Everything that disagrees with your claim, you're just going to say, oh, that came later. Like, how do you know? It just did, because it's circular reasoning. It must have come later because it disagrees with my thesis. Anything that disagrees with me must come later. And so, and also, I mean, just with that part in Exodus 3, another thing, and this was actually kind of supports one of her claims regarding ancient Israel. The very fact that you have, when Moses encounters Yahweh at the burning bush, who should I tell them sent me? What does that tell you about the Israelites who were in Egypt at the time? They were effectively pagan. Like, which God are you talking about? And that, to me, explains why when they get to Sinai, what's the first thing they do when Moses is gone? Well, let's build a calf and call him Yahweh, because that's how they were viewing Yahweh in the way that Dr. S does say a lot of ancient Israelites did. That's true. That is totally true. But at the same time, in the text that tells us about that, it also emphasizes, like you emphasize, that Yahweh is actually different, and that's the problem that ancient Israel had. They were effectively, and I would say throughout their history, a big portion of ancient Israelites were kind of pagan, hence the idol worship and the golden calves and all this stuff. That's true, but at the same time, you have this other aspect of, no, Yahweh's different, he's unique, and you see that those two things bumping up against each other throughout the Old Testament. And I would say that's a more realistic understanding of ancient Israelites' history. And that would make more sense of why in the text that we have, you have acknowledgement of what we call the pagan view of Yahweh, if you want to put it that way, golden calf and stuff, but also a condemnation of it, because that was the point of contention back then. So, yeah.
Do you know what the author of Hebrews does with that account? That was a great reminder of, again, how ironic that calf incident is precisely showcasing the psychology of the time.
Yeah.
Don't forget, when you look at say Hofmeier's work with respect to the Exodus account, its historicity, the fact that Exodus as a book has a lot of these loan words that fit a 19th dynastic sort of period. So even contemporary Egyptologists like Bob Ryer, who has no, I don't know, like, I suppose if any of the online atheists are listening to this, because they'll be immediately thinking, oh, but you're working within your own, quote unquote, echo chamber of scholars, I suppose. Yeah, even Bob Ryer, okay, he's a well-known televised Egyptologist. Like, he's been on, say, Discovery Channel, and I actually like his work. Like he's done stuff on, say, the Great Courses on Egyptology. So Bob Ryer says, hey, just with hieroglyphs, the science of hieroglyphs, understanding hieroglyphs, I can actually defend the Exodus account, and I can actually, demonstrate the real psychological underpinnings that's going on. Like, yes, okay, the text reads theologically. There's like a theological massaging going on. But the text actually does go back. It does go back to the 1200s BC. And their practice, their reactions are very natural given the situation and given their psychological, I wouldn't say brainwashing, but just that generation that needed to be, over time, the wilderness wandering was actually to root out that generation to then bring about like a fresh stock, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think again, this is all background stuff before we even get
to
our book.
Yeah.
But again, it goes back to, I think, generally how you come to the biblical text. A work that I really like, Ian Provin, he wrote a biblical history of Israel. And I think his take, to me, that it's the best one I've read. He basically mentions that a lot of these more recent scholars, the more extreme being the minimalists, but even a lot of other ones who don't go that far, they still have this, like we said, this assumption that if we read in the text a certain ideological bias or a certain literary artistry, then therefore it can't be historically reliable. And Provin says, well, he doesn't say it this way. I'll say it this way. That's kind of stupid. Every ancient text comes at it from some kind of ideological bias, and every ancient text is literary shaped. That alone doesn't negate the historical reliability of it. And he basically, because of that, he argues that, if you go back to the time of Abraham, all the, from Genesis and Exodus onward, you have to look at the wider variety. It's claiming to be a witness to history. Yes, it's shaping the events to make a theological point. And yes, there's a lot of literary artistry going on in these works, but that doesn't mean they're not historical, but unfortunately, I think, and a part of it, I think, is because we've grown up in the, the 20th century with movies. When we think of the Exodus, we think of Charlton Heston, like, are you claiming it happened that way? It's like, no, that's
especially when Moses starts singing.
Right. And so it's just, so like when it comes to the Hebrews and in the Exodus, I think there were, and I think this is as far as you can take it. I think there was a group of Hebrew slaves and others who left Egypt at some point. Most people think it's either the 15th or 13th century, but even that's kind of a guess. It's going to be muddy. You're not going to know for sure. But I think there was a time when they came out and they eventually made their way to Canaan, and then eventually we see the rise of Israelite culture. I don't think there's nothing about that general understanding that is objectionable. But unfortunately, for a lot of today's, some of today's scholars, I think, unless you find actual hard evidence all the way through on every point, we're going to reject it all. Like, that's not me. That's not how it should work.
Yeah. And they carry a lot of that Egyptian baggage, like all the seals, the king's seals, and so on. Yeah. They have just a lot of that Egyptian imagery. And then the northern,
and it shouldn't be surprising.
Northern, like the so-called 10 tribes in the north, keep falling into that anthropomorphic idolatry. And marrying Yahweh with
and that's one of the things in the book. She emphasizes, like, in the ancient Israel, they viewed God anthropomorphically, just like any other ancient Near Eastern culture. To an extent, I don't think anybody would deny that, But what she does, though, is she thinks that it's all that.
It's monolithic, she thinks.
Yeah. Good word. Right.
And here's say the author of Hebrews, which, by the way, I'm in the minority position. I hold to the Priscilla theory.
Oh, okay.
That Priscilla wrote Hebrews.
Okay.
I know Apollos is, but if you say Apollos, well, guess what? Priscilla taught Apollos. So
And my view is I don't know.
Yeah.
We just don't know. We have guesses, but
but in Hebrews 11:27 it says, by faith Moses left Egypt without being afraid of the king's anger, and he persevered because he saw the one who is
invisible. Yeah.
Ooh. So wait, is the author of Hebrews... All right, Joel, tongue-in-cheek question.
Okay.
Is the author of Hebrews biased psychologically due to Greco-Roman Platonic theology?
Well, clearly.
That Hellenization of the Second Temple period that then leads to hey, I'm going to read this text as Logos theology, not ancient Near Eastern idol. Like, I literally considered Yahweh once upon a time having a gigantic P.
It's again, I think Dr. S, because I'm not going to try to consistently say her name because like I'll get tongue tied. You know, she would say probably, I'm guessing, yeah, he is a product of Second Temple Judaism that was influenced by Greek philosophy, and that's where they get it from. Like, well, I don't know. I think they get it from the Old Testament, you know. And he's the author of Hebrews is therefore just relating what has always been the case, you know. So,
but just again, just emphasize to everyone, that's the point of when you look at the history of, for example, the Maccabean Revolt. Why were the Jews? In fact, I'm currently writing. I spend my free time doing devotional writing on like my own sort of like diary approach to certain books for my local church. So I've written on Mark and Revelation. Currently going through Daniel. I've just reached Daniel 11:33. So I'm right at the cusp of like the Maccabean Revolt. Antiochus doing what he does. And I spent the last week reading on Judas Maccabeus, Judas the Hammer. And I've been, just this very like, when you read it surface level wise, you sort of just read it as when you come across that stuff, you just read it in passing, it's just like, oh yeah, this is what happened. But now that I have more time to look at this more in-depthly, there's a lot in there that's really intriguing and inspiring. So the fact that you have the so-called desecrating desolation, or this abomination of desolation, why? It's because, like, in other words,
because they had the conviction that God doesn't have a body.
Yes. If we took Francesca's ideas, and she is a female version of Antiochus IV. Like, it's just one of those, hang on, you're telling me that even during the 2nd century BC period, that these Jews who, by the way, just came out of Babylon, and they had physical, images. If this is a genuine thing in the Hebrew canon, like if your thesis is correct, why the reaction? Why is it even called an abomination of desolation? It should not matter whatsoever. So it's anachronistic to psychologize, the biblical authors of the say even the pre-exilic writings, right? As apparently that there's this hidden conception of Yahweh as being this physical deity, when the very notion of their reactions and what then brought about this thing known as Hanukkah, and and then, for example, you see writings like this in Hebrews 11 where there's this reaction of, yeah, that's what makes it that much more weird and awesome. They saw God. He's meant to be invisible. That's the point. The Jews who, the Bible is a Jewish book. The New Testament is not some Gentile book. It's still in the same strand where the Maccabean context is that they didn't want to be Hellenized. They didn't want to go down Antiochus's path. Yes, they became Hellenized, say, in the sense of their, the language that they started to speak, Greek and so on. But the theology is still consistent. And so the fact that they're saying stuff like, he saw the one who was invisible, notice, they're acknowledging that he is invisible, but that doesn't mean when they saw God, that therefore he is an actual physical like an Ubermensch, human body of some sort.
And one of the other things that she mentions in the book, which again is valid, because there are elements in the places in the Old Testament where God shows up and eats with Abraham, and then there's certain areas where it does seem, or at least the way it's written, there was some kind of encounter. On one hand, it says you can't see God face to face, but then here, and here, he shows up and he talks, there are certain passages in the Old Testament that are bizarre. They are. And, for example, early Christian theologians, when they look back at those examples, and that's where they argued that this was really the pre-incarnate second member of the Trinity. Right. And they're trying to wrestle with those odd passages.
That two powers motif and all that stuff.
And they're trying to figure it out. But again, what was disappointing is when she does mention that, she kind of mentions it in passing, like, well, they were just trying to rationalize things. Screw that. We really know that God had a body, and it's just such a simplistic take. And I would say, throughout the Old Testament, and this is one of the things she makes a big deal about, throughout the Old Testament, it talks about how, God looks upon, and Jerusalem is God's footstool, and it used anthropomorphic language all over the place, obviously. But I had never heard anybody claim, as she does in the book, that because it says Jerusalem is my footstool, that God had really, really big feet. I'm like, that's clearly a metaphorical, you're using feet as a metaphor. But she's like, no, he had really big feet. I'm like, I don't know anybody that's why so much of the book just kind of humorously shocked me. It's like, I had never heard anybody claim that God had really, really big feet, or that his penis filled the temple, or he hung his penis in the sky after the flood.
Yeah, the bow thing. Oh my gosh.
But again, if you want to drive home this one thing, you're going to see it everywhere. Actually, one of the things, I don't know if you saw this in the Twitter feed initially, when I initially joked about that and people were getting mad at me. Some other guy, I forgot what his name was. He's a Twitter guy. He posted a few memes, and there was one meme with Buzz Lightyear and Woody, and Buzz Lightyear was pointing.
Penis
is everywhere.
Yeah.
I was like, I
think either that's my mate, one of my good friends, Amir, who posted that.
Maybe. Or that cracked me up.
Because that was sent to me in private, but yeah.
Yeah, because again, throughout ancient Near Eastern mythology, a lot of things like clubs and hammers and swords are often sometimes used as a phallic symbol for the gods. Yes. But that doesn't mean every time a bow or a club is mentioned that it's a penis. But by reading
there we go again.
That is. It's like
seriously, this is when God in Genesis 9, okay? This, if you're going to take her thesis, like, let's just take it 100% wholesale. We hook, line, and sinker, we buy it. So, for generations, Jews, in their reading of Genesis 9, are reminded of the sign of God's covenant with Noah. So when they see a rainbow, there's God's penis in the sky yet again. And that can happen multiple times, by the way, depending on the season of the year. So it's like, you are telling me that this is what people are thinking or imagining in their minds. Can you imagine telling your child, like, hey, there, kiddo, we believe in a deity with this massive cock? Like, it's just, and then, like, and there you go, here's a phenomena that takes, obviously they can't explain scientifically, but here's a phenomena that happens. And
his bow in the sky is because he's like the divine warrior, and he's putting his bow up on a hook, so to speak. There's nothing in the context that would suggest that. Now, again, there's sometimes you can kind of see this, and I'll bring up another example that she has later in the book, where she talks about in 2 Kings, I believe, after Elijah gets taken up in a whirlwind, and Elisha goes back home, and the 42 youths come out and mock him about go up Baldy, and he curses them, and 2 she-bears come out and maul him. Again, odd story. A lot of people don't know what to do with that. And I interpret that when you look at the context, I'm going to the whole thing. I think the Baldy part is because Elijah had been the head of the prophets, and now he was gone. These youths were mocking Elisha for losing his master, so to speak. But we know that he has been given twice Elijah's spirit. He's the new head guy. So when he curses them, 2 bears come out and maul him, right? I think in the context, that's what's going on. In the book, she claims that there's a little bit of, they're mocking Elisha's erectile dysfunction. And then there's a gender bending thing going on because he curses them, and 2 she bears, hairy female bears, come out and maul them.
Yeah,
she reads into it erectile dysfunction and gender bending. And I'm thinking, how do you get that? I'm sorry.
That's right.
It's just, and here's the thing. And the explanation that somebody tried to give is because earlier on, Elijah is described as a very hairy man. And in the ancient Near Eastern world, being very hairy is a sign of masculinity and virility. And so therefore, by calling Elisha baldy, they were saying he was effeminate and blah, 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 blah. And my reaction is like, okay, theoretically, if you're talking about that text, you can say we can kind of possibly see mocking him for lack of being masculine, kind of maybe in the background. It's all how you approach it. If Dr. S would have said, here's what's happening, what's probably going on is they're mocking him because they think he's lost his master. Along with that, we can kind of more creatively see this masculine thing going. If she would have just presented it as kind of, this is more speculative, but we're thinking about, then you can go, okay, we'll think about it. But she doesn't do that. She just says, oh, it's erectile dysfunction. Like, no, it's just a lot of her more questionable claims. I think the thing that was most off-putting, it wasn't that you could put forth questionable claims, because that's how you learn sometimes, what about this? But she just threw it out there as if this is the way it is, without considering the text, without considering, God's bow in the sky. It's his penis. That's what it is. Like, really? You don't even argue it. You just assert it, And so it's one of those things that is problematic. Let's put it that way.
I'll bring up specifically just because I know people will be shocked.
Yeah.
At this Elisha one. So here's where she speaks about erectile dysfunction. So is this coming up clear? Is the text readable?
Yeah.
Okay.
I see it.
So she goes, according to a collection of folk tales in the books of Kings, Elisha might have inherited Elijah's hairy animal skin cloak, but have failed to make up for his baldness. When he is teased by a gang of small boys, go away baldy, he might as well have been mocked for erectile dysfunction. But Yahweh heeds Elisha's call for a curse to fall upon the children and responds with a sardonic, gender-bending flourish. 2 hairy she-bears suddenly appear and attack the children, shredding a staggering 42 of them. So then, in your blog post, you're like, I'm sorry, but erectile dysfunction? Gender-bending she-bears? Like, it's...
I mean, it almost is like, and I always, my friends and I, whenever we are faced with something that we just is so bizarre, it reminds me, it's a classic line from one of my favorite comedies of all time, Zoolander. Do you remember Zoolander? With
I remember Zoolander. I haven't watched the second one though, but
the second one's horrible. Don't bother with the second one. But the first one at the very end, because one of the joke is Derek Zoolander. He has all these looks, but they all look the same, right? And at the very end, Mugatu, the Will Ferrell character, he just Derek Zoolander, all these looks, it's all the same look. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. And when I read stuff like that line, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. Where do you come up with this?
I'm going to use Zoolander now as part of my review. Thank you for because
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. Yeah. It's just so odd. I mean, there were many times she put forth a claim where I was like, I couldn't even let's explain why it's wrong. It's so bizarre on its surface. And in her book, she doesn't really go into, she doesn't make the argument why you should believe her. She just throws it out there, which again, I would think stylistically is a problem. If you're going to make a controversial claim, you better make the time to really bolster your claim. Just don't throw it out there and, put in a footnote, oh, it's in this book. That's not going to convince people, but, Yeah. So
Just quickly, a really interesting paper on this. So she doesn't engage with this paper. This is a JBL publication,
mhm.
reasonably recent,
Yep.
2010. This paper actually Heiser uses for his unseen realm, in the
Oh, okay.
sense of the whole divine council theology. So notice this going down to Bethel, Elijah and Elisha in the theological geography of the Deuteronomistic history. So, and in fact, Heiser has even, I've even uploaded a video clip um, about this on my channel, where Heiser goes through this very paper, showcasing that there's a lot more going on in the scene
Hmm.
than, just this assertion of that he's bald
Yeah.
and his, the mocking, so to speak. Because there's this language of, you know, go up, and
Yeah.
Elisha, he went down. So there's a lot more going on
Hmm.
in the scene than her conjecture that this is
Yeah.
something to do with erectile dysfunction. And so I just wanted to, again, for anyone who's
Mhm.
interested on this account, like, yeah, it's a weird account,
Yeah.
but there's a JBL paper that actually showcases the coherence of the account in light of, and most so in the context of those who are fans of Heiser,
Yeah.
that divine council worldview.
And a lot of times, a lot of the, I would say some of the more, if ever you come to a passage in the Bible that seems really bizarre, like
Hmm.
a lot of times it's the writer has put it in there knowing it might sound bizarre. And if you look at the larger context, the answers to how to interpret that is often found in the larger context. It takes digging. You got to be a good reader of the text. But a lot of
Hmm.
times, the answers are kind of there if you take the time to consider the context. But again, one of my big critiques of Dr. S's book is she doesn't consider context because she obviously doesn't care for the final form. She's already thrown that out. So that leaves you
Yeah.
with, oh, I'll just cherry pick passages to suit my own um, agenda that God had a literal body. And along with that, all these other things about the God of, Old Testament was, patriarchal, misogynistic, blah, 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 all this,
Mm.
I would say more modern, woke, liberal, progressive stuff reading into the text. Um, so
All right. Would you like to go? So we
we've
fleshed
already
out a
hit it.
lot in 15 minutes.
Yeah. Well, we can't go through
How
everything.
yeah. Yep, it's up to you as well. So
Okay.
go
Well,
through what you want to go
let me
through,
point
and
out. Let
yeah.
me point out some of the things I'm
Hmm.
looking at. Um, I think the basic thing that I try to emphasize in my blog posts is my fundamental problem with the book is that, like we've talked about before, she doesn't care for the final form of the text. She thinks the final form of the text is like a curtain that that tries to, what's the word? It's the final form of the text is a post-exilic scribal attempt to cover up the past, you
Mm.
know, because the scribes of the post-exilic period were these horrible patriarchal elites. And so
Mm.
therefore we can't trust what they write. We have to get behind the text to find out what really happened. And what really happened is Yahweh was just another ancient Near Eastern God. That's kind of her thesis, which I think is kind of problematic.
Yeah.
Um, let me see here. We can go through some, and we actually in a rambling discussion already. We've kind of talked about some of this stuff already.
Hmm.
We talked about that. We talked about that.
And if we ever touch on Isaiah 6:1, I'll read up some
Yeah,
recent
we'll
scholarship
kind of
on that.
touch. Yeah, we'll touch upon that.
Yeah, later on.
Um,
Yeah.
well, one of the things she mentions is, and it kind of goes to the Deuteronomy 32, is that
Hmm.
originally Yahweh was just a minor deity that he eventually supplanted Elyon. And at one point when she throws that out, she says, basically, unfortunately, again, I'm not quoting her because I don't have it in front of me, but like that's what she claims to have happened. That he was a minor deity who eventually supplanted the
Yep.
Elyon and took over. But unfortunately, we don't have any evidence for it. She didn't say it that way, but basically, it struck me as funny. It's like this is what this is like at the heart of what her presentation is. But
Mm.
she kind of, in a very subtle way, it's like, we don't really know how that happened. That's what it was. We have no evidence of how it happened. It's like, well, maybe.
Yeah, I'll bring it up.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I'll bring up the
you can find
particular...
it pretty easily. I thought that was kind of an interesting bit.
So she goes, is this coming up nice?
Yeah, yes. I can see it.
So fragment of ancient poetry in Deuteronomy not only locates Yahweh within the pantheon, but also reveals exactly who his father was.
Yeah.
Oh boy, here we go again. It's not like this is not new to, scholars like the late, say, Dr. Heiser and stuff like that. It describes the separation of humans into distinct groups. Yep, I agree with you there.
Yep.
And explains why each group was allocated a particular deity to act as its special patron. But the deity supervising this division of divine labor is not Yahweh, but Elyon, a title of El reflecting his role as the Most High God of the pantheon. So here's her translation. When Elyon apportioned the nations, when he divided humankind, he fixed the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the divine sons. For Yahweh's portion was his people, Jacob or Israel, his allotted share.
And so she's saying basically right there that's two different entities, Elyon and
exactly.
Yahweh. Right.
Yeah.
And the thing, and she points to like some other ancient Near Eastern culture mythology that has a divine council and all that stuff. And again, that's true in other ancient Near Eastern cultures. You have this. And again, I think this specific passage, there is a parallel. I don't know if she brings it up or maybe it was somebody else who brought it up in one of my discussions of an other ancient Near Eastern mythology myth that kind of has that same kind of thing. But again, I would come back with if, let's say that, yeah, that's true. In other ancient Near Eastern cultures, Yahweh was viewed as another deity. When you look at Deuteronomy 32 as it is presented in the text, oh, hold on.
No, that's all right.
Mute. Hello.
All right. If anyone here has questions in the live audience.
My child was wanting to talk to me, apparently.
That's all right.
Grandma called and was like, well, but I was going to say, when you look at Deuteronomy 32 as it is, and elsewhere in the Old Testament, I just don't see how you can get the concept that in 32 that these are two different beings,
Right.
So that's a long argument that could be had, but anyway.
Well, on that specifically, if you see here, this is my good friend Hound. He's like, rabbinic exegesis has Yahweh actually casting lots with the angels at the Tower of Babel. So what, in fact, just since he's just mentioned that, there's a dissertation that is absolutely fascinating. Again, a very recent one. It's titled Moses and the Septuagint. Moses and the 70 Elders, Mosaic Authority in Numbers 11 and the Legend of the Septuagint. Now, Septuagint is a word that means what?
70.
Oh my goodness. How many sons of El were there?
I'm going to guess 70. I don't know why I'm saying it that way.
Yes. and how curious. Later on in his dissertation. So here you have, let's see if I need to read over here. So the prince's language, like you see in like Daniel 10 on. So here's rabbinic exegesis of Deuteronomy 32. Remember the days of old, consider the years of ages past, blah, 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 that the Most High gave nations their homes, set divisions of man, fixed the boundaries of people in relation to Israel's numbers. Now, we know that it's Yahweh doing this in Genesis 11.
Yep.
So how can you then say that Yahweh is he's one of those lesser deities getting his portion when Genesis 11 says it's Yahweh doing it, and Deuteronomy 32:8 is saying it's the Most High, meaning Elyon is Yahweh of Genesis 11.
Well, and again, I think that the answer, which I would not agree with, is that in the text we have, they're trying to cover up the fact that there were two different, and they're trying to blend the two.
Yes.
You know? And it's like, well, but the text says this, your assertion doesn't have any textual evidence.
Right.
And so
what this guy is wanting to point out is that even in rabbinic exegesis, they are not stressed about this. They're not like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
What do we do with this? Like exactly with the way, like, imagine if the rabbis themselves read what Francesca wrote, they would be horrified with her exegesis. But notice beautifully, like, okay, there's the Qumran reading, sons of El, or sons of Elohim. Then you have the Masoretic text, sons of Israel. What this guy is trying to do in his dissertation is that, look, the Masoretic reading is not, as Francesca is trying to argue, is not some massaging or cleaning up the polytheistic tones of the text. Rather, the Masoretic reading is right in line. The Masoretic reading doesn't contradict the Dead Sea Scrolls reading or the Septuagint reading. So it's, notice how he builds up the case. So he fixed the boundaries of peoples in relation to Israel's numbers. Now, how many were in the Sanhedrin?
70.
Oh, wow. I wonder why. So notice over here, he continues. He's like, this is then contrasted with verse 9, where the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. Lot is the key word. So citing the Masoretic text in Psalm 16:6 as support, the PRE suggests that God cast lots with the angels, and his own lot fell toward Israel, resulting in the allocations mentioned and the dispersion described in Genesis 11:5. And so this goes into, casting lots among the divine council. There's 70. Then you have, the Sanhedrin representing 70. I wonder if there's anything else.
And I think, I would say, in other ancient Near Eastern cultures, they do have many gods, divine councils, all that stuff. That's true, but it's clear that what we have in the Hebrew text, even though they have that same general setup, it's clear that Yahweh's the top guy from the beginning, and so there are similarities with Deuteronomy 32 and other ancient Near Eastern mythological views of the gods, of course, because that's all from the same kind of culture. Yep. But the differences are the things that you stress. That's the significant portion, and that's why you have, the Hebrew Bible and the ancient Israel. They're unique. Their view of God was unique. Again, not all of them, because many in Israel were basically pagans, but there is this strand that goes all the way back, right?
So here's Targum Sudha Jonathan, right? So since Genesis 10 mentions the 70 nations, here we go. This is a paraphrase of Deuteronomy 32:8. Let's just see how the paraphrase takes place. So when the Most High gave the world as an inheritance to the nations, which came forth from the sons of Noah, when he divided alphabets and tongues to the sons of men, he cast lots with the 70 angels, the princes of the nations, and established the borders of the peoples according to the number of the 70 souls of Israel, which went down into Egypt. There you go. The Masoretic reading does not contradict the Qumran reading. It's just part of that. In fact, the Masoretic reading, ironically, if you're aware, if all of this is flowing through your mind, if you went back in time and you were embedded with this, walk like an Israelite reading in the Second Temple period, a Masoretic reading doesn't contradict the Dead Sea Scroll reading. Like it's part of that discussion and that theological discussion that they're having. All right, so that's just a little side tangent point. Got that out of the park. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Let me see what other things I thought we talk about that. Sorry, I'm skimming. What I've done to prepare for this, I kind of went through my 10 posts and I just kind of highlighted a few things that are interesting. Let's put it that way. let's skip to a couple of things in the New Testament. And again, granted, we're
like I said,
what?
The woman washing his feet.
How did you? How did you? That's exactly what I was going to look at.
I'm guessing that. No, well,
yeah,
I've read a book.
That is amazing. Like right when you said that, like, can you see my notes? That's exactly what I had pulled up.
No. But yeah, that actually pissed me off. This because my favorite Jesus film is the 1979 Jesus film. That scene is beautifully presented in that scene, like amazing. And this one really pissed me off. Anyway, go for it. Like what?
Well, here's basically what was argued. She mentions the scene where the woman washes Jesus' feet, with her tears, dries them with her hair. That's I think in Luke 7. That's what she says. And she says, this was considered scandalous, and it would be if a woman comes in and washes guys' feet. Like, yeah, that's in that culture, that would have been kind of a taboo thing to do. All that's true. But then Dr. S takes it a little too far. And she says, this has all the elements of erotic play, that was some kind of sexualized thing, which I think that takes it too far. But if that wasn't enough, she said, therefore, because we all know that feet can mean genitals. Side note, sometimes it does. In the context, sometimes it does, because it can be a euphemism for genitals. But because feet means genitals, and her washing his feet with her hair is erotic play, that should cause us to look at Jesus as washing the disciples' feet in a different light. And I was like, are you kidding me? Really? Like that was some kind of homoerotic play at the Last Supper. She doesn't say in that, but that's what she's implying, which is, it didn't piss me off. It just made me laugh because it's so absurd. But again, the way she gets to that point, again, this is why I think I mentioned in my post, it's like, I found a lot of her argumentation just skips from this passage to this, very much like the Gish Gallop of the, what the Gish Gallop is?
Yeah.
That
Dwayne Gish.
Dwayne Gish. He just jumps from where you can never follow a coherent argument. Yeah. On one hand, sometimes feet in the Old Testament is a euphemism for genitals. So and in most English translations, they kind of translate it out where when King Saul is looking for David and he stops in a cave to relieve himself. The actual phrase is to uncover his feet, which means he's exposing his genitals so he can relieve himself. Yeah. When Ruth goes into Boaz at night and lies at his feet and trying to get him to marry her, I think that is probably an indication that she's not doing stuff to him necessarily, but she's letting him know, hey, if you marry me, I can make you happy. I think you can make an argument that feet in that context and Boaz's feet was probably a reference to, his private parts. But that doesn't mean every mention of feet is genitalia, and there's nothing in Luke 7 that would indicate erotic play. She's washing his feet. Yeah, it's his feet. And then when he's washing the disciples' feet, he's washing their feet. There's no genitalia involved. But it's just, it struck me ludicrous. And it's amazing that you knew exactly where I was going with that. So
yeah, because that when I came across that, I then could not stop reading because of how horrified I'm thinking. Are you actually now really, really, really going there? And plus the citation, she uses Greco-Roman sources, which I've even gone into those sources, and the sources don't say what she's saying.
Yeah,
it
reminds me.
It's
go ahead.
No, go for it.
Okay. Yeah. It reminds me a lot of this stuff, and I was thinking I didn't put this in one of my posts, but I'll share it now. Back years ago, when my mom taught first grade, and I remember years ago she told me of this one incident in her classroom that happened one day. This one boy, we'll just call him Bobby. He was apparently came to class, and he was going around to all the other first graders and kind of whispering something to the ear. And my mom was at her desk, and she noticed, like, whenever he whispered something into everybody's ear, all the other first graders were just like, oh, they were like getting freaked out. And she's like, what's going on? And so one of the kids came up to my mom and she said, Mrs. Anderson, Bobby's saying a naughty word. and she's like, well, what is he saying? It's like, I don't want to say. And again, these are first graders. And so my mom was like, well, you can tell me, whisper it in my ear. And he's like, he's saying penis.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Bobby was going around saying penis in everybody's ear because apparently he thought in his mind, oh, penis, I'm a big boy, I can say it. But the very way he was doing it showed his immaturity, and he was just trying to shock people, And I think a number of the arguments in Dr. S's book, like this one, like no reasonable person is going to be reading the text and come to the conclusion she's coming with. She's doing it just to kind of be edgy and provocative. And from where I come from, good exegesis, that's not your goal. Your goal isn't to be novel and edgy and provocative. It's just, what is the meaning of the text? And if you want to try to be edgy, you end up doing what she does in this case. And it does offend people and shock people. I'm not offended or shocked just because I am sarcastic enough to where I just laugh at it. But it's just, I can't take it seriously.
Yeah, so what I'll do is, again, just so that we're not making this stuff up, this is what she does right. So what I'll do is I'll read what she says, and then I'll read how New Testament scholars, even the most liberal critical scholarship, so like the Hermeneia series, for example, like for example, there's a commentary by Provin on Luke in Hermeneia, which I'll read in a moment, where he very carefully, if you do go down the sexual reading, obviously Francesca's gone down the deep end with this, the imagery is actually very beautiful. It showcases the transcendence of Christ, and that he's not basically this carnal dude. The way our sinful flesh likes to immediately think of whenever these scenes rise up. So she says, the veneration of Jesus' feet is most explicitly expressed in the story in Luke's Gospel about a woman who seeks out Jesus while he's dining at the house of a Pharisee. Notice her emphasis: conservative group of Torah specialists. Yeah. It's like conservatives. She has to insert that bit there, right?
Yeah. She does it throughout the book. Yeah.
Yeah. If you read between the lines, it's just there's all this. I won't get into it, but it's but described as a sinner and given no name, which, by the way, this is a presumption, Mary Magdalene. It's not. I don't take the view.
It's not in the text technically. Later church historians kind of combined that with her, and okay.
Yeah. So she positions herself at Jesus' feet as he reclines at the table, weeping so much that she floods tears upon them. She bathes his feet with the tears and rubs them dry with her unbound hair, a style more usually seen publicly on women venerating the gods in a sanctuary or performing mourning rituals. Her flood of tears becomes a rain of kisses. She has not stopped kissing my feet, Jesus approvingly observes, while she anoints and massages his feet with a rich ointment. The ritualized nature of her actions is impossible to miss. She washes and anoints Jesus' feet as priests in a temple would wash and anoint the cult statue of a god, simultaneously acknowledging and marking its sacred status. But the intense sensuality of the scene also communicates an eroticism that many have found discomforting, including the Pharisee in the story, who is shocked that Jesus should let a sinful woman touch him in such a way. It is a scene emphasizing the overwhelming sensuous excesses of her body. Hang on. Well, this needs to be nuanced a little bit.
Yeah.
What parts of her body?
Yeah, where does it talk about that? And again, in that culture, it would be shocking to have a woman come in and do that.
Yes.
But then, and that part's true, but then she immediately jumped, therefore, it's like this erotic thing with her body. And you're like,
yeah.
Whoa, where did you make that jump?
By using her flowing hair, wet skin, and the repeated actions of her mouth and hands to caress Jesus' feet, her actions take on the characteristics of sexual stimulation. What?
Yeah.
Sexual stimulation and erotic play. as seen in visual and literary works across the contemporary Greco-Roman world, where long-haired slave boys anoint the feet of diners at lavish banquets and winding
Yeah.
garlands around their ankles,
And
is an
then the next
experience Luke's
paragraph.
Jesus endorses.
Yeah.
And then against this backdrop, is found in John, describing Jesus washing his disciples' feet, looks rather more. Look at this.
Yeah.
More suggestive.
See, that's the thing. I think 99.9% of people who read the Gospels never even see what she's claiming.
Jesus was a closet homosexual.
Of course.
Just FYI. Like, yeah.
Because, and this is another thing in the book, let's jump to this, because all throughout the Old Testament, Yahweh hates beautiful women and just wants to shave their heads and inflict them with boils, but he really digs Saul and David because they're good-looking guys. It's like,
indeed.
That's
what the Jews at the time. That's exactly the conclusions they came up with.
Yeah,
that was their pressure.
One of the things she says throughout her book, she tries to paint Yahweh as like this woman-hating misogynist, and then she'll point out certain passages that are shocking. Whether it's I think Ezekiel 16, or certain prophetic oracles where it talks about women being
Ezekiel 6 Ezekiel 16, yeah.
And again, there are passages that describe the sexual humiliation of women, and she goes, "You see, therefore Yahweh hates women. She hates their beauty." But then there's a lot of other passages throughout the Bible where women's beauty is praised. But she doesn't even mention that. She just has she has this hard line. She wants to. Yahweh's a misogynist. So therefore, let's take these passages out of their context and just drive that point home. For example, in Ezekiel 16, where it's the story of, again, it's a long metaphor where Ezekiel's prophesying, and at this point, this prophecy that happens before. You have to put this in a historical context. Ezekiel was part of the first wave in 597 who were taken to Babylon. And for 10 years, he was in Babylon while Jerusalem and the temple still was standing. And everything in the first part of Ezekiel, he's prophesying that Jerusalem's going to go down. It's going to get destroyed. And in that context, he gives this prophetic metaphor, I guess you could say, where God is telling Israel that I found you in Egypt. You were this outcast girl. I saved you. I washed you up. And then when it came time to you to become a woman, I took you as my bride. But then you slept with all these other foreign gods, basically. And because of that, your skirts will be pulled over your head. Your private parts will be exposed and all this horrible stuff. It sounds horrible because it is. But in the context, the point isn't that God wants to inflict damage on women. The point is, in that context, because Israel has gone after foreign gods, those foreign nations are going to come and destroy you and do these things to your women, and because they were monotheist, ultimately Yahweh is responsible for everything that happens. So that's why I will do this language, but it's describing the horrors of war when an opposing nation comes and destroys your city, your country. Same thing with the prophet Nahum, because she mentions this as well. Prophesies the destruction of Nineveh, and he uses a lot of the same imagery of the women will have their skirts pulled over and be raped and whatnot. That's what happens when the Assyrian army or the Babylonian army came in and did these things to those people. And that's the prophetic judgment. You worship the gods of foreign countries. Those foreign countries are going to destroy you. And it uses all these supposed to be violent images of women and children getting abused. That's bad. He's not approving it. But what kills me is that when she describes that stuff, Dr. S basically just says, this just shows that God hates women, and this was used to tell women to put them in their place so they don't upset their husbands. Like, that's how she interprets those passages. I'm like, that's not what it's saying at all. So, yeah.
I think what I'll also do is, because I want to read the Luke commentary on that, but you bringing that up, so just to emphasize, the so-called violence against women stuff. Here is Craig Costa.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a brilliant commentary. This is for Anchor Yale, so it's an Anchor Yale commentary on Revelation, 2013 publication. Let me go, so you guys can see the image. Here it is, Anchor Yale, Revelation. Is it appearing for you? There it is.
Oh yeah.
Craig Costa. Okay, now he has here, in regards to Revelation 17, the bit where he talks about the woman riding the beast.
Oh, okay.
So now Craig Costa is right in line. He specializes in Greco-Roman stuff.
Yeah.
And this is why Anchor Yale chose him to write a commentary on Revelation, because Revelation is basically a polemic against Rome.
Yep.
So look at what he says. He goes, interpreters have often commented on the disturbing quality of Babylon's demise. Babylon here, code name for Rome.
Yep.
A particular issue is the way the author uses feminine stereotypes to show God's action taking the form of violence against women. Some point out that the vision is not about women. Rather, it uses feminine imagery when calling for resistance to Roman imperialism. Others respond that the use of such images does have a negative effect on the way readers perceive gender roles. Now, this is where Craig comes in. So he's like, an important dimension of the question is how this imagery fits Revelation's understanding of justice. The writer works with a sense of symmetry in which the perpetrators of violence become the victims of their own practices.
Yeah.
Roman iconography celebrated the conquest of other nations that created the empire in which John's readers lived. For example, in a relief from the imperial temple at Aphrodisias, the Emperor Claudius conquers a woman who personifies Britain. So here you go. Yep. Here's a male conquering Britain. And and how is Britain depicted? As a woman. So in another, Nero stands triumphant over a woman representing Armenia. In these sculptures, the women who symbolize nations are partially stripped and physically subjugated. So in John's vision, the pattern is reversed. The female figure is no longer one of the other nations, but is Rome itself. The personified city is stripped and devastated by the same kind of violence that her rulers previously used against others. The brutality that created the empire now becomes the empire's undoing.
And that's why the woman who rides the beast is the whore of Babylon, and she's guilty of destroying people.
The blood, exactly. The blood that fills her cup is exactly.
Right.
So here's, for example, Nero subjugating Armenia.
Yeah.
So wait, are we going to now do the whole like woke culture reaction? How dare you, Greco-Romans?
Yeah.
How ironic. They won't pick up on that. They won't do that.
Imagery that was used at the time. And nobody is going to read that part of Revelation and go, oh, therefore we can beat women. That's nobody in their right mind would interpret it that way. Mm-hmm. That's not what it's talking about. And by the way, this is another thing I did not put in my post that actually did. Most of the stuff I have enough of a sense of humor where I just kind of found a lot of it silly. But one of the things that did kind of anger me, and that's probably why I didn't put it in, because I didn't want to get too over the top, is throughout the book, she makes this argument, that, Christianity and scribal, Second Temple Judaism was misogynistic and horrible, and they hate women, blah, 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 blah. Not like the goddess worship of the ancient Near East of Asherah, and that's, they were against that stuff because they hated women. Well, the thing that bugged me is that if you know anything about ancient paganism, and you definitely see this in ancient Rome and also in ancient Near Eastern context, the pagan cultures, the fertility cults, where they had gods and goddesses having sex, in order to worship these gods, you would go to these pagan temples where they would have prostitutes, temple prostitutes, sacred prostitutes. And I can guarantee you those women and girls and boys and men who were the sacred prostitutes, they didn't want to do that. It's called forced prostitution, where the pagan priests were basically the pimps. They were the abusers who forced these women to do this sort of thing in worship of their pagan gods, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what you get in Judaism and Christianity is a condemnation of that. Why? Because women have value. Women are created in God's image. And so for anybody, I'm going to have to tone it down because I get angry, to claim that, throughout Christianity, have there been instances of, women getting the short end of the stick and bad actions? Obviously. But to say that Christianity and Judaism hates women, and if we would have just kept up with the pagan goddess worship, that was the misogynistic, horrible treatment of women. Mm-hmm. That's what Judaism and Christianity condemned. And anybody who knows anything about this stuff should know that. But you wouldn't get a clue by reading this book. It doesn't mention that at all. It's just like, pagan goddess worship was awesome. And it elevated women. No, it didn't. It subjugated women to be prostitutes. That's why in ancient Rome, if a woman had a daughter, the husband who talked about patriarchy and misogyny, who didn't want a girl, throw it out in the trash. They would throw exposure of infants, and then people would pick up the girls who had been tossed away and raise them to be prostitutes. How is that not? That's what is worthy to be condemned. But yeah, so I don't know. That just, to overlook that when you cry patriarchy and misogyny, Christianity, blah, and you overlook the actual patriarchy and misogyny and abuse of women that happen in pagan temple cults. Oh my gosh, that angers me.
Yeah, again, and then the fact that you mentioned that again, Numbers 25 is a litmus test of this.
Yeah.
Yes, it is graphic imagery. You know, the spear.
Yep.
Spearing those two people. But that's exactly God's reaction with respect to the fact that if that act is taking place in sacred space, which was happening in the other ancient Near Eastern contexts, this is what marks the differentiation between Yahweh's sacred space versus the other gods of the nations, the other Elohim of the nations, and how they just, the whole fertility psychology. Yeah. And so how ironic, right? Here in Numbers 25, you have God. Don't do this.
Yeah, I'm not like them.
Yes.
Yeah. But again, that must be a later gloss, obviously. Yeah, obviously.
Oh no, not just one word. A whole chapter happens to be.
Books.
Anyway,
but that kind of thing angers me.
So here I want to quickly read out what Bowen says in Luke's account, and then from there we can go to your next point.
Yeah.
So he says the following, and by the way, I'll have to share my entire screen. Let's see if this comes nicely. There we go. Okay, so this is a fantastic commentary on Luke. So Francois Bowen and Hermenia series, 2002 publication. And this is what he says. So he says, I'll sort of skim read through it. So he goes, the story continues, a woman then approaches Jesus. So from behind probably manifests the surprise after narrative silence about her entrance. Let's see. A theatrical substitution for the towel is a woman's hair. Then after this, the evangelist mentions Jesus' feet a third time, which the woman now kisses for a long time. Only then does she perform the act of anointing already prepared. Let's see. It is because something unusual happened, an anointing of the feet, that this recollection remained alive among early Christians. One could even make this more precise by saying that this woman could find nothing better to express her love than a gesture of erotic love. In this, one should not, of course, see an erotic scene. Okay.
No.
I can't emphasize this enough. Here is mainstream scholarship with respect to Luke's account. Don't see this as an erotic scene. For the woman is crying. Okay, now just quickly. Someone just, I'll just quickly show this. Someone just in the comment section said it perfectly. Tui. Weeping and mourning and crying and sobbing equals erotic.
Oh, yeah,
Dr. S, apparently.
Some people are kinky.
So, coming back to Bovon, he goes, so this one should not, of course, see an erotic scene, for the woman is crying, but rather inappropriate behavior by the standards of that time. The woman comes into the midst of a dinner reserved for men, carries a bottle of perfume, unlooses her hair, a particularly erotic action for Jewish perceptions, repeatedly kisses Jesus' feet, and finally, in the presence of all the guests, does something that belongs in the realm of intimate behavior or even of perverse practices. She anoints his feet. Okay, this is what makes Jesus unique. Jesus, however, interprets the entire sequence differently than does the Pharisee and does not reject these gestures. The Pharisee is outraged that Jesus allows himself to be touched by such a woman, a fact that has been drawn into consideration far too seldom. Jesus reinterprets the gestures that are, according to the cliches of that time, erotic, because the woman's tears reveal the true meaning of her actions, although this is expressed in a completely external sense, in a manner that is determined by her past. So, then he continues. By recalling the invitation, Luke heightens the degree of outrage on the part of the Pharisee, who promptly reacts to the events in the form of interior dialogue. The Pharisee is interested not in the woman, but only in Jesus, who, after all this, cannot be a prophet. Otherwise he would know who this woman is and what kind of a woman she is. That is a sinner. Thus the woman knows about Jesus, and the Pharisee similarly knows that Jesus knows nothing about the woman. So here's the point. Basically, it's to do with the pseudo-knowledge, the difference between pseudo-knowledge and real knowledge. And then, you know, he'll go into it, showcasing how Jesus sort of examines the situation. Jesus doesn't see this as erotic. So what I'll do is I'll read from this particular scholar. So this scholar summarizes Bovon's points. So this is by David L. Teed, the Augsburg commentary on the New Testament. So he goes, the woman's behavior is stunning. As these men who are teachers of Israel recline around the table, she appears weeping. Her exact sin is never disclosed. And then Jesus gives, but here's the point, Jesus gives no hint of a sexual meaning to her actions when he comments on them. Instead, these are acts of hospitality, of deep love with no erotic connotation. Yes, she is a sinner. Luke's introduction of her, Simon's judgment, and Jesus' declaration agree. Attempts to determine what was the sin of the sinful woman may reveal more of the interpreter's biases than the woman's past. Jesus' interpretation of her act is all that matters. This is the crux of the point.
Yeah. And I would say, I mean, I think I mentioned it before, but that scene, again, it depends on how you, like those passages that you just quoted are acknowledging that, for some people there, it would have been seen as kind of sexually suggestive. Right. But the point is that it's not, right? And that's not how Jesus took it. And so, again, if you're going to make the point of there were some sexual connotations in the minds of some people there, you can make that argument, but state it in a way where it's not just like, oh, it's erotic play. You know, when you say it that way, you're just like, it's so oversimplistic. And I would add, and for the life of me, I can't remember if it's in Matthew or John. I'm killing myself. But the other scene, right when Jesus is at the house of Simon the leper, just shortly before he gets crucified, that there's another story about a woman coming in. Is it in John or Matthew?
It's also in Mark. It's at the end of Mark as well.
Yeah, maybe somewhere. Yeah. And that's when they're upset. And this is textually, I think, is important. Because at this point, they think he's the Messiah, right? They're hoping he's the Messiah. And the Jewish hope was that the Messiah, the anointed one, would come and kick Roman butt and cleanse the temple and all that stuff. And he tells them, she's anointed me not to become king, she's anointed me for burial.
For
so in
death.
that context, there's nothing erotic there. He's talking about the act of anointing. It's a commentary on how they viewed his messiahship and how it really is supposed to be. His messiahship, he's coming to die and resurrect, not to rule politically. So
yeah, that is a fantastic point, by the way.
Yeah.
Because
if you're all about eroticism, you're going to miss it.
Yeah, no, that is a fantastic point. Because I've even written on that. I mean, I can even bring it up if you want me to, but
it's subtle things like that you have to be a good reader of the text to kind of what is the text saying?
Here we go. This is in my Mark commentary notes. So here I've put together.
Wow.
There's this implication, Jesus defends a woman's actions. Leave her alone. Stop bothering her. She's done a beautiful thing for me. And then he goes into this like why? What's going on here? And yeah, she poured perfume on my body in preparation for my burial.
Yeah.
And so Joel Marcus,
he
writes over here something quite interesting. So he goes, the prophecy that follows of the worldwide proclamation of the gospel suggests that Jesus' death will not be the end, or the news would not be good. The woman's action, therefore, is the prelude not only to the last sad episode of the old age, but also to the first triumphant chapter of the new one. The subsection concludes then by transposing Jesus' praise of the generous anonymous woman into another key. Not only has she done a good deed for him, but it will be mentioned wherever the gospel is proclaimed as a memorial for her. Notice that. Imagine if this was a sexual act, right?
Yeah.
Yes, let's venerate as a memorial. As Jesus says, this will be a memorial to her. That this was a sexual thing that took place just before I was killed. I mean, Jesus is here probably employing a standard formula found on gravestones and in other memorial contexts. This formula fits into the general context in which Jesus has been talking about his own death and burial. In an unexpected twist, however, he now speaks of a memorial not for himself, but for the woman who has just anointed him. This twist points to the surprising reversal implicit in the conclusion of the subsection. The burial of Jesus will not be an end, but a beginning. So here's where it gets interesting, theologically.
Yeah.
That means this is a hint of the resurrection in her act.
Yeah.
He will not require a memorial, because he will not remain dead. And the power that his resurrection will unleash in the cosmos will transform the deeds of those who serve him into episodes in the worldwide triumph of the gospel, which, by the way, to come back to... I'll stop sharing now. Now to come back to the woman who was weeping and crying and so on, and then when Jesus does the feet washing himself, that power play, the first shall become last and last first, that's the point. Jesus is seeing her as an imager of God, for goodness sake, and looks through all the BS and the biases, the way those Pharisees were reacting, and treating her as an imago Dei, basically. And even cutting right through all the gender biases that could be at play. And here's a woman, preparing Jesus' burial. But theologically, the point is, no, this is just the start of the new, how C.S. Lewis would put it. This is just the title page or the cover page of the great story that will be unveiled, right?
Yeah.
So, I was going to say something, but it's slipped my mind. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, but you get all that. And again, I've said this already many times. You get all that by taking the text that we have before us seriously and try to understand the context in which things are presented. But again, if you don't accept the final form of the text as trying to convey meaning, and you just cherry pick it and mine it for your own preconceived agendas, that's where you get, homoerotic play at the Last Supper, and or another thing she says that when Gabriel comes to tell Mary that she will be with child even though she's a virgin, Mary says, "May it be according to your will. I'm your servant." And in the book, she says she didn't really have a say in the matter. God just did it to her, implying
Yeah.
And again, it's the equivalent of that little first grade Bobby whispering penis in people's ears, trying to get a reaction. And it's just, you don't, I can't get upset over it. It just shows what kind of, silliness it is.
Do you remember on that Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, Kindergarten Cop?
It's not a tumor. Kid. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. When the little kid's like, what? Boys have a penis, girls have a vagina. And then, do you remember his reaction? Thanks for the tip. it's like...
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the tip, Francesca. That's...
Well, and the thing is, again, there are many things in both the Old and New Testament that are pretty edgy and vulgar. It is. Like when Elijah confronts Ahab after Naboth's vineyard, the actual phrase used when Ahab sees Elijah, when Elijah condemns Ahab for what he does, most translations say, and God's going to cut your family off and every male in your family off. The actual phrase is wall pisser. I'm going to cut every wall pisser off from your family.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I first found that out, I'm like, all right, this is the inspired
the King James,
word of God.
Piss it against the wall, yeah.
God can be kind of edgy. I like that. But that doesn't mean that everything else in the Bible is, erotic and it's not. I don't want to sound.
By the way, there's the King James only movement.
He pisses on the wall, yeah.
Pisseth against the wall, yeah. So there's.
He actually translated it well. Yeah.
Yeah. The King James only movement. So that Stephen Anderson that it went viral.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know about. Don't piss against the wall or something like that. Like he actually made a whole sermon dedicated on that.
I thought it was like, I'm a man and he's standing up. Or I thought it was that kind of
thing. Or something, but basically because he's King James only, he's reading this and it's like, see, it says pissed against the wall. It's
just a euphemism to designate a guy,
Yeah.
It's colorful. But I don't know. So it's just one of those things where, okay, I'll say the positive things about the book is that, she does go into a lot of detail about a lot of ancient Near Eastern mythology and practices, some of which I didn't know.
And to be honest, that's probably the only positive thing I can say in regards to the fact that if there's a Christian reading this, okay, let me put it this way.
You can learn about.
We'll finish your point because
you can learn about ancient Near Eastern mythology and practices.
Yes. Yeah.
And by doing so, it does force you to look at certain passages in the Old Testament that are similar and go, okay, what's the connection? And I think an honest analysis you'll see the differences, and that's the point. Where she goes wrong, I think, is when she interprets everything in the Old Testament through that lens alone and disregards the context. And then you end up getting some really just nutty views. And I would equate it on going back to the times that I wrote out Young Earth creationism, like, some Ken Ham claims about, he has some nutty views that just the text does not support. And it's just like, because he's coming to the text with a predetermined agenda, so I have to make it fit. So I'll ignore certain things to make my point fit. And she's kind of doing the same thing in another sense, I think.
So I think, piggybacking off your point, I think I like it. Okay, you and I are reacting negatively against the book because you and I are sensitive and aware and actually love and appreciate ancient Near Eastern scholarship.
Yeah.
And obviously she's an ancient Near Eastern scholar herself. But she admits that I don't want to put words in her mouth in the sense of say bias, but she starts her book off giving a frank admission about her pushback against certain professors in a class. Like she'd raise certain questions, and
I felt sorry for them. She said something. I feel sorry for the professor.
You have to wonder if she's even being truthful with respect to the questions she asked the professor and how the professor conveniently says, nothing to see here, move along, citizen. That sort of approach, supposedly the professor of hers did to her. But that being said, if it wasn't for providentially the theologians and scholars who are faithful to the text, like, in this case Christians, and that I'm not saying that they're biased. It's just they have a faith conviction.
Mm-hmm.
They're honoring the text, and there are good men, past and still current living, whom she can't deny as being good men in her field. Like, well, when I say men, I mean both. There's even women in her field that are very good. That your Ken Ham, answers in Genesis type Christian, like, say if those people didn't exist, how are you going to respond to Francesca's claims? Your young at creationism is not going to help you.
Yeah.
And the sad truth is that I see it all the time. All the atheists on YouTube are ex-fundamentalist, ex-young creationists. 99% of them are exactly that.
That's when I did the book.
Just quickly, even the people that have commented on your blog posts, reviewing her work, they are ex-young creationists.
Yeah, or at the very least, ex-conservative fundies. They
But which part of there's a common denominator, is what I'm saying.
And that
how interesting that those who come into the faith from an academic, they start from a critical academic point of view. Like, for me, that's how I started. I wasn't brought up young creationist.
Right.
Well, how is it that these people maintain the faith ever more so in a bigger freedom sort of sense? Because it's joyful to come across something.
Well, and I think that's I think that's one of the things when I was doing the blog posts and interacting with some of these people, and I've interacted with some of them on other things too, that has always been in the back of my mind. I've said it numerous ways, but it's fascinating that, like, some of the, I would say, the most militant atheists, if you want to say, who are just out to, they wouldn't say it this way, but they're out to undermine the credibility of the Bible, and they try to read into everything. They come from very fundamentalist backgrounds, and they've rejected it, right? Like you said. And I also often wondered, why is that? Like, I had a personal friend from high school. He went to my high school, which was a Christian high school. And we, by chance, we ended up going to the same graduate school at the same time, doing biblical studies. And he and his wife, they were part of my close circle of friends at Regent College. After that, he kind of, I would say, kind of went off the deep end. He's like, Marx is a good guy, Karl, not Groucho, communism is, Marxism is awesome. And he became very angry and just very belligerent about anything Christianity. I kind of, why is that? Like, because we both kind of grew up in the same Wheaton, Illinois, kind of went to the same high school. But I thought, my parents, you could say they're largely conservative, evangelical Christians, but they were very level-headed. They were thoughtful. They weren't dogmatic about certain things. If you ask them about Revelation, what does it mean? Well, it's kind of hard to tell. They're not going to get on the Tim LaHaye bandwagon, or was the earth created 6,000 years ago? It's like, well, it doesn't really say. We don't know. They
get all hot under the collar.
And so I was never, but I think his family were very, strict that way. And so if you grow up in a culture where, and this is what I criticized with Ken Ham in my book, Heresy of Ham, that kind of mentality that you're using the Bible to defend your political, social views, and that's really all you're using it for. And then if you leave that fundamentalist camp, you still have the mindset that, what do I use the Bible for? I have to mine it for my political, social views, And so a lot of these ex-evangelical fundamentalist types who are now atheists, they're kind of still doing the same thing with the Bible that they did with their families did before. They're not enjoying the Bible. They don't see the beauty of the Bible and the truth of the Bible. It's just, what verses can I pick in mine to get my political point across or my particular ideology across. So they're still doing the same thing. That, so in that, I've said it this way when I, in some ways, to use big names that people know, like Ken Ham and Richard Dawkins, for example, they're kind of each other's doppelganger in the way they approach the Bible. They kind of do it the same way, and so therefore my encounter with what I call the Twitter hyenas, who kind of attacked me, a lot of them were, ex-Christians, ex-fundamentalists, and they're doing the same thing. And that's why they're so angry. Because when I was on a lot of young earth creationist, creation evolution websites and talking about stuff, I got a lot of those type of people accusing me of being an abortion-loving, gay marriage, liberal, every stereotype.
I know. I remember that. Yeah.
And I'm not. But now in this case,
in fact, the woman we were debating, she started accusing you of that. Yeah. And she was like, "Rob, you're going down that direction," and I'm just like.
But that's when you are an ideologue, when you are given to a certain entrenched ideology, you see anybody who disagrees with any you say as the polar opposite. And so therefore, in the last month and a half, when I was doing these posts, I had a number of people accuse me right off the top of the bat. You're a Trump worshiping Christian apologist, all these things.
You're living in sin because you're a theistic evolutionist.
Yeah. And I can't be angry at these people because what they're projecting on me is their own problems, and it's both extremes do the same thing. They interpret everything through that kind of lens. And so it's sad on one hand, but it's comical on the other hand, And one of the things that I noted, I'll just bring this up too, because I was thinking of whether or not I won't say his name. You can say his name if you want. One of the guys who immediately started ragging on me as soon as I just mentioned, I laughed at a few of her comments before I did the posts. I just kind of posted a couple of Twitter comments about God's penis filling the temple, and there was and God had sex with Eve and who gave birth to Cain. That claim. And I kind of joked.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Kind of bizarre. Gosh. Anyway, this one guy who, this one guy who I'm sorry, I'm looking at these. It's so funny. At the corner, I'm seeing some of these comments, and one just popped up like, well, I don't know what that is. Anyway, and so this guy, he just immediately started going into personal attacks against me, and like, oh, Joel's not an academic. He hasn't published in 10 years. All just. Mm-hmm. And it didn't bother me because I wanted to say, it's like, right when I got my PhD in 2009, I did publish a number of articles because I'm going to try to do that. But then a whole bunch of things happened in life that kind of, at that point I was
married. By the way, Kip Davis, if you actually read the personal Emmanuel blog on Joel's personal life,
my wife got
things happened.
Had cancer while she was pregnant, and that was a whole mess. And then I got screwed over by a young earth creationist administrator and lost my job. And I had to raise a son by myself who has autism. So I was like, yeah, Kip, sorry, I didn't get as many academic papers published for you to be impressed with. Life happens, I don't base my self-worth on getting academic papers published. I'd like to. Sometimes I get a few published here and there, but for the most part, I write on my blog because I'm busy raising single parent raising an autistic son. I don't have the time to do stuff that you think is academically appropriate, but it's stuff like that. It's kind of angering, but at the same time, I'm amazed at the lack of self-awareness of some people like that, who they don't even consider that their whole thing is like, I have to prove I'm an academic and I'm going to destroy everybody who disagrees with me. And, and I think I made some quips. I'm not going to comment on that. Never mind. I was going to make
that's right. Yeah.
a quip about.
No, I'm fine. I Kip really, there was an initial appreciation that I had of Kip when I first encountered him. I think I first came across him 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half.
Yeah.
I forget now. But I've known of Kip for like interacting wise, I've known him for that long, and maybe 2021. Since 2021, I've known him, and I don't like to make enemies per se, especially on YouTube. Like, for example, Derek, who runs MythVision.
Yeah.
Yes, we butt heads, but I send him super chats. I support Derek sometimes. Obviously, when I'm sending super chats, I'm engaging directly with the scholars he's bringing on, and I do raise good questions for them to answer. And Kip Davis himself acknowledged once upon a time during a stream that that I ask him tough questions and a lot of times needed to think about it, and then but Kip sort of noticed that, and I'm just saying this directly to Kip, I'm not the one making a mockery or sleight of hand underlying comments, pejorative comments.
Yeah.
I'm not the one that initiated that first. Kip then started going down the this tangent on like Rob is the Deepak Chopra of Christian apologetics.
That's
literally what
reaction.
he says.
That's the first thing he goes to. And I'm like, I can see if you get into an argument at some point, you say something, you're like, that was probably not good. But when that's your first reaction,
I'm not the first that started it.
That's something about you. Like even when I wrote these posts about the book, like I feel I'm critiquing her claims, but I make it a point. Like, I think this is where she's coming from. I know she's a good scholar. I just disagree with her. I'm not doing personal attacks against her. Like, what's the point of that? But when that's your first thing, I need to character assassinate this person. That says something a lot more about your own insecurities as a person. We're going to psychoanalyze. And, and when somebody does that to me, I want to mock them.
And the irony is, I don't even claim to be a specialist in this field. Yeah. Like everyone knows on Sentinel, this is like, yes, I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
It is a personal. Okay, I'm in academia from a scientific background.
Yeah.
I'm finishing my master's soon in down the nanotech and astrophysics line. And when you're trained to read peer review a certain way, so obviously I have access, and as you can see, now that I've put my foot into now the humanities section of academia, the Bible being obviously in that field, then why should I go and search up Joel Osteen or, not to throw Lee Strobel under the bus, but say even Lee Strobel's works and like that, because that's sensationalist material. I only care about, the JBL papers and, stuff like that. And I have to wonder, are they intimidated that this Perth boy who now and then goes for a surf and is pretty amateur when it comes to biblical scholarship, like an amateur in the sense I'm this interested amateur with, critical biblical scholarship.
Well, I think
that why like how is it I'm able to do these things, but I don't have any, say, formal seminary training?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of. Go ahead. You finish that.
No, I just want to. The point is that I'm making is Kip or people like Kip suddenly becomes this, and it's something I've noticed with them. All these atheist streams, where, say, for example, Kip will be on and all that. I'm not denying their specialty in the sense that they've had. You need training to reach a certain level to then be like a sensei, right? You have to go through the motions, and then you become a sensei if required.
Yeah.
So therefore, it would be the height of arrogance, especially for, to use, because I do kendo, and I understand that dynamic of master servant sort of dynamic even in martial arts. So, it would be the height of arrogance on my part to, in my amateurness, to say that I can beat my sensei You know, regardless, Kip PhD, I don't.
Right.
So therefore, I will always approach him with respect to the fact that he's attained something that I don't have,
Right.
and ergo, the only way I can engage with Kip is to play by the rules that honors his position. Just like in Kendo, I will always be a student with respect. Like if I'm, say, a first dan Kendoka, that's still nothing compared to like a sixth or seventh dan Kendoka, and you still play by the rules. You don't play dirty or cheat.
Right.
With that older, wiser, more experienced Kendoka. And so therefore, this is what makes it so ironic. Kip, then don't go down the derogative route in mocking people when you already have a position
don't
where
punch
you're meant
down.
to. Yeah, I mean, it becomes this lorded over them sort of attitude, an elitism sort of attitude, and basically in Kendo terminology, you are now worse than a novice.
Yeah.
No
it's
sensei.
not a good look.
You don't just start smacking people around and
you're an idiot. I have a PhD.
It's ridiculous.
We've all read enough people who have PhDs who've written some bad things. Just because you have a PhD doesn't mean you're God. Doesn't mean you know everything. And that's the purpose of scholarship and interacting and reading articles and giving you challenge people's views. You say, hey, this doesn't make sense. What about this? And if all you're concerned about is I have to show how smart I am and I got to destroy everybody who questions anything, again, that shows there's something wrong there. And unfortunately, I think and I'll just stick to in the field of biblical studies. I mean, there's plenty of great biblical scholars who are humble, who are thoughtful, obviously. But like with any field, there are some who view it as I got to carve out my little fiefdom and fight anybody who disagrees with me because my whole sense of self-worth is this degree, And personally, I that's the vibe I get from certain people that won't be named. You can name, like I've never made a big deal about, PhD. I do have a PhD, but I worked, as a high school teacher while I got it. And, I'm sure, for example, Kip probably knows Hebrew better than me, because he's still in the field on a daily basis. I know Hebrew. I can get through it, and I know how to read it. And I think I have a good knack for interpretation and translation and how the text works. But, that doesn't mean I'm a moron because I don't, because I don't know every Dead Sea Scroll. That wasn't my field. That wasn't what I focused on. But that very combative personality it's I don't know. It's not a good look. Let's put it that way.
JS, atheist scholars united, we will tread on you.
But I've seen some of these questions here. It's kind of interesting. I'll just mention.
Is there any particular question that's popped up that you want to respond to?
It's not really about this topic, but I don't know. I'll just kind of.
You don't. If it's off topic, you don't need to respond to it.
It just. I thought Joel was kind of almost cool with gay marriage, at least on his writings on the Nashville-Denver controversy. I wrote that a couple of years ago. That's a whole nother topic. But I'll say, like, I don't. My view is if a certain society wants to legalize gay marriage, regardless of how I feel about it, you deal with it. I don't care. It's not no skin off my nose. I don't like the people who crusade against it, but at the same time, I don't like people who's like, if you think there's a problem with any of my own, agenda, then you're a horrible person. It's like, in a free society, you in a democracy, you play by the rules, and if that democracy is that in this America, that republic passes a law for a certain thing, okay, I'm not gonna worry about it, But But yeah, I just saw that. I'm
What?
like, oh, yeah, that's out of left field. But I did write about that a few years ago.
So what I'll do is okay, was anything else? Because I want to maybe conclude it on the icing on the cake would be the Isaiah 6 vision.
Yeah, do you want to finish?
We can finish there if you want. I don't know. Like,
okay. Well,
any
I think
other
we kind of
examples you
mentioned
want to raise?
I think we pointed out most in a rambling way. We kind of talked a lot about it. But yeah, the Isaiah 6 vision is where I think we mentioned this before. The hem of his robe filled the temple, and she was arguing that it really was his big penis that filled the temple. But the reason I found that so humorous is because that reading contributes nothing to the text, to the meaning of the text. The whole purpose of that text is that he gets a vision of God in the temple, and the whole purpose is that this is where Isaiah is commissioned to prophesy to Judah, and God tells him ahead of time, by the way, nobody's going to listen to you. They're all going to hate you because they're idol worshipers. And because they're idol worshipers, they're spiritually deaf. They'll have eyes that they won't see. They'll have ears, but they won't hear. You're going to speak the word of God to them, and it's not going to sink in because they're idol worshipers. They become deaf and dumb like the idols they worship. Right? That's the point of Isaiah 6, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're going to focus anything on Isaiah, and this is one of the things that boggles my mind, is like you go to a passage like this, and then you focus on like, oh, but this one word actually can mean penis. You're like, what does that have to do with anything in the text? That it's nothing. And it's so, I don't know, it's just nutty to me that you would waste your time on that, because it's not even supported. It doesn't make the text. It doesn't illuminate the text.
Yeah.
But apparently, because of that, I'm a horrible person because I don't agree.
So, what I'll do is, let's see how I'll do this. Okay, I'm gonna read probably the best summary of this. I'll read from this particular work. So this is Encountering the Divine, Theophany in Biblical Narrative by George Stavrakopoulou. He published this in 2005, and under the category of sudden appearance, here is, so I did another keyword searches. I've highlighted all the relevant words and so on. And over here, he clearly breaks it down, where he says, okay, he qualifies what he saw, mentioning only the distant border of his robe. This distancing process is introduced by the initial image of enthronement. And if you come down to, let's see, instead of the zoom-in technique that we saw in the triple stages of Jacob's ladder vision, here the virtual camera moves away from the vision. Since he's privy to this remarkable sight, we expect Isaiah to describe this vision of Yahweh in greater detail. But instead he describes only the outmost fringe, the most distant part of the vision. Which, by the way, I think the other scholar, Williamson, I think he brings this up, but there's a way to even understand this as, when it says the Lord of Hosts, or like he's the cloud rider, basically this robe, like, in Psalm 104 where he's clothed with like light and the sun, and so that means, this is why I purposely chose the thumbnail for this stream the way I did, is because there's this depiction that, going back to the whole divine council thing, the rims of his robe are the divine council members. It's the divine council that sort of dresses Yahweh, so to speak, and fills the temple, right? But this guy, so he continues and he says, so the hem of his garment, so this particular Hebrew word in question, would indicate the inadequacy of human vision to encompass the divine, both in sight and in description. Now, against this traditional reading, so Driver was the initial guy to bring this up, and then Eslinger is the guy that Francesca quotes, But only this guy, no one else. Let's see if there's anything. Okay.
Yeah.
Have suggested it implies not distance, but a glimpse of utmost intimacy.
You can't get more intimate than,
So Esslinger maintains that the basic meaning of the term is a physical one, and the meaning robe is to be understood as a metonymy for the body being concealed. The purpose of such graphic anthropomorphism is not to depict the anatomy of the deity. Now notice this is this guy coming back in point saying, okay, if it is graphic anthropomorphism, it's not to depict the anatomy of the deity, nor indeed to assign sexual identity. So as Francis Christopher likes to think it's a male, Yahweh is a male deity.
Yeah.
But rather to convey a sense of a quote-unquote sacred nakedness unshielded by the usual cultic prophylactic. Now, in footnote 113, he says, this is not done to ascribe male sexuality or androgyny to Yahweh, as does this guy did in 94, God's phallus and other problems for men in monotheism.
Yeah.
So it's rather intended to serve as a metaphor of what is normally hidden from display. And so to read the career remarks by, guess who? Mark Smith. Because Mark Smith was critical of this.
Yeah. It's just too much, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that being said, so that's this particular situation. Now, Williamson, so to bring Williamson over here. So in his 2018 Isaiah commentary, he brings up Esslinger again. And because he's dealing with even much more cutting-edge scholarship, and he's very thorough, very like exhaustive with the research. So he goes through, for example, L's penis.
Yep.
And he goes through breaking this down based on Esslinger's propositions. And he responds in turn. And specifically, he says something quite curious. He juxtaposes the Masoretic reading of Isaiah 47:2 with respect to the Great Isaiah scroll. In other words, the Hebrew term that's used in Isaiah 6:1 that Francesca and Esslinger likes to think is God's penis. The author of the Great Isaiah scroll uses this term instead of the Masoretic reading of this term in Isaiah 47:2. And Isaiah 47:2 is basically Babylon. So take millstones and grind flour, remove your veil, strip off your robes. But hang on. That's one hell of a castration, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Strip off your penis or genital. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, but he brings up a paper that I tracked. I was able to track. It's over here, actually. Where is it? I think it's in footnote 13. Let me zoom out. Where is footnote 13? Here we go. Yes, so Williamson brings up this paper down over here. He's like, most recently, the whole subject has been thoughtfully reviewed by Popko, and he opts firmly for the traditional understanding of our verse. All right. Now, curiously, he's engaging with Jeremiah 13:26. And I know Kip did a live stream on this. After I already asked him super chat questions on this very paper. So here's the paper by Popko.
Yeah.
And he wants to showcase that, so he's like, look, this is a summary of his paper. There are no convincing arguments to see 1326 as a simple image of sexual violence. Okay? And so, yes, there's euphemistic tones, but it remains only a possibility. The parallel verse 22 also does not speak directly about a scene of rape. The metaphorical stripping of the female person-wide city, both in Mesopotamian Lamentations as in the book of Jeremiah, refer rather to the destruction of the city's temple by polluting and uncovering its sanctuary. Now, he quotes Esslinger, because Esslinger is dealing with Nahum 3:5, and because Esslinger translates Nahum 3:5 as, I will expose genitalia to your face.
Yeah.
which is not what English translations. No
Right.
English translation gives this rendering, and obviously no English translation translates Isaiah 6:1 that Isaiah saw Yahweh's penis filling the
Right.
temple, right? So, but I found this footnote hilarious
Okay.
because even this guy went off in a tangent. Kind of, you can actually read, you can
Mm-hmm.
read the horror in his writing, like his reaction. He's just like,
This.
Esslinger basing his thesis on the interpretation of that
Mm-hmm.
word as genitalia in Jeremiah 13:22-26. Apply this meaning to the Isaiah
Yep.
vision. He
That's what
arrives
comes
at a
from.
grotesque image of God's penis, and you're reading that correctly, filling the
Yep.
temple. Yet not only the methodology of this extrapolation is dubious, it goes against the logic of royal imagery that is
Mm-hmm.
incompatible with the presupposed divine nudity. A naked figure, even sitting on a throne, could not have been perceived as a king. That interpretation goes against all that we know about Near Eastern royal imagery. Not
Yep.
even Ishtar, the goddess of sex appeal, was worshipped as a naked figure. On the contrary, nakedness conceives weakness and ignominy.
Yeah.
So, that in a
Well,
nutshell,
clearly that
that's
guy's not
to.
a real scholar because he disagrees with.
Oh, he's no. None of these are real scholars, by the way.
And the thing is, it's. I would argue you could simplify. You don't even have to get into all those weeds, even though apparently sometimes you need to. But to
Yeah.
just on the surface, that interpretation just does not make sense on the surface of the text. And then when you dig deeper with all that, it even becomes more absurd,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but again, that's what happens when you try to do exegesis and you try to come up with something edgy and novel, but that's not. To me, fundamentally, that's not what exegesis should be. You're trying to understand the meaning of the text, and when you
which is precisely the point you're trying to make, even in that flood debate. It's like,
yeah,
how ironic, right? These people like Kip,
yep,
who may mock,
yep,
young Earth creationist concordism.
yep.
It's like, dude, you're doing exactly what you're
Yeah.
critiquing them of.
Maybe you should do another. You should do another podcast about like how Kip is like Ken Hovind.
Yeah, in the Copenhagen school of interpretation.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. And yeah, in any case, I mean, I'm glad I read the book, because it is when you read books that you don't agree with and you take the time to interact with it, and in this case, write blog posts or do podcasts about it, it does foster more thinking and more contemplation about things you might not have thought about before. And I think ultimately that's a good thing.
Which is fine. That's fine with any book.
Yeah, and
if
so
you're
like
intimidated by it, it's actually, it reflects on you. It's not the author of the book.
Yeah, and so like whenever the stuff I've written, if some people disagree with certain aspects and give a good argument, I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'm not all knowing. I might be wrong. I'm not, but no. But yeah, get your ego out of the way. If you put something out there, you're going to assume that people are going to disagree, and that's okay. But
Tui is a good friend.
Yeah.
I like his comments. He's like, novel exegetical terms can be useful on the rare occasion that they help increase a greater total comprehension of the text. But novel because he penis is unuseful.
Well, and again, it gets down to like if you're going to make a claim for a certain interpretation, you have to take the time to make the argument why it makes sense in the text. And again, that just again stylistically, she doesn't do that in the book. She just kind of throws these assertions out and throws a footnote like, oh, this one book here agrees with me, but you haven't convinced the reader that that's the way to go. Even if you're right, which I don't think she is, she hasn't taken the time to make the argument in the book.
And why hasn't any scholar, like if you're talking about say Isaiah or even her ridiculous image of Ezekiel 1. She sees the whole thing like the rainbow over Ezekiel, the vision that Ezekiel has. That, don't remember the rainbow thing? It's the penis, and it's like even like the most liberal critical commentaries don't even agree with this stuff.
Yeah.
Surely some commentary somewhere would have mentioned, oh, by the way,
well,
this is
that's why
about the penis.
I think it was either in my 9th or 10th post, I kind of gave the example of like when I was at Regent and we were doing the Bible criticism class, and we came across some of the, back then, some kind of out there criticisms, like feminist criticism about how the abyss in Revelation is really the vagina dentata. You're like, what?
Oh, God.
And so my friends and I, we start as kind of like an intellectual fun game. We would just start taking random things like, well, and I think I did this as an example in one of my posts, like, when Moses came down Mount Sinai, light came from his head, and like some translations say horns. Well, we know what horns mean. And then that takes it to, you could just put together anything to come up with the most absurd thing. It's really fun to do for a joke, but, Samson, they shaved his head, emasculated him, but then he became more hairy, and then he got a big boner and pushed down their pillar boner. You can come up with anything. As a joke, but when you take it, people who take that seriously, boggles my mind.
So to paraphrase what you're saying, Austin Powers. Is a paraphrase is a not a, well, I wouldn't say mockery in a harsh negative way, but a genuine fun, but at the same time, wink wink mockery at the James Bond, or the classic James Bond.
Caricature of the James Bond.
Yeah. Right. But people like Kip and Francesca is saying that Austin Powers is the legit thing.
Yeah.
It's not the Sean Connery Bond, or even now the more recent, which I much more appreciate, Craig's interpretation of Bond. It's not that mainstream, the original primary source. It's Austin Powers.
That's what really is true. Yeah.
That's what's really true. I mean, it's... but this is what's frustrating me as a non-specialist in the field, where I see specialists not making these arguments.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the majority of them. But then you have... This is a minority position.
Oh yeah,
even Kip acknowledged it. It's a minority. It's an exceedingly minority position.
And that's what you have to remember with this kind of stuff. And this is why it didn't get to.
But they make it like this. It's the majority is what I'm trying to say.
It's always the loudmouths who try to impose their view and denigrate anybody else who disagrees. They're in the minority. And I'll give you one example. I learned this long ago, not in the academic realm, but when I first started teaching at a small Christian school in the late 90s. And this is how naive I was. I just finished Regent College. I'd done all this research and learning about Genesis 1 through 11 in the book of Revelation and what it meant in the original context. And I thought, hey, I'm going to teach a Bible class to these seniors. Okay. And this was like a pretty conservative evangelical school. And again, I was so naive. I just kind of assumed that, hey, we should learn about this stuff and be challenged. Right. And I started going off on like some of the early, I think it was like Genesis 1 through 11 stuff, how to interpret it against the backdrop of ancient Near Eastern myth, because there are some connections and stuff and I had 2 or 3 students in this particular class that were just like, no, I don't respect you. And they were just going nuts. It was blowing their minds. They were entrenched in their view, and now I was the devil. As a first year, second year teacher, I was like, oh my gosh, what's going on? But what happened is, after this happened many times, after the class was over and those 2 or 3 stormed out because they were so offended, everybody else, either after class or they'd come by my class during lunch, the quiet kids, the thoughtful kids, they'd be like, I'm so glad we're going over this stuff because I've always had questions about it. This makes so much more sense, And I think the same, especially with social media, the loudmouth Twitter hyena bullies, they do have a minority fringe position, but you wouldn't think it if that was your world, because they're the ones dominating the screaming, And so when they kind of attack me for questioning the book, in my mind, like most people who are watching this interaction are quietly going, yeah, I don't like those nut guys. And I actually got quite a few private messages from people who are very supportive of, and not even if they didn't agree with everything I had put out there, they were like, yeah, these guys are really hateful nut bars, and so I that's what I always remember. Like a lot of times the people who are screaming, they're screaming because they're the only ones out there and they just want to hear their own voice, and so you interact with them a little bit, but at some point they're not worth it,
And I genuinely want to see, like, say, in the next, say, 10 years, I want to see if God and anatomy or works like this continue to be produced.
Yeah.
What the state of the seminary will be like moving forward.
Yeah.
Because you have other folk like Dan McClellan making these arguments that the bodiness of God, which, by the way, Benjamin Sommer, when he wrote about the bodies of God, he's definitely not arguing for the depictions that Francesca is saying, but rather there's this, it's going down the trajectory of, well, basically Benjamin Sommer's point is he's trying to bridge two powers hypostasis with his Jewish audience, basically. Yeah. That, hey, the Christians all along were technically correct with the whole Trinity stuff. Here's how you can see that in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just, in other words, I want to, I'm definitely going to be taking a, once I finish my review as a layman, and put it out there. Right. Then for the next 10 years, I want to see what happens with the field. Like, will Old Testament professors, commentaries in 5 years' time, will they start going down the, no, we have to finally agree with Francesca all along, or will her book just become one of those Dan Brown sort of books that just, it has a little bit of a sensationalist point, it gets a little bit, there's a high,
and it goes away,
and then
it's hard to say.
Let's see where the trend goes. That's mark my words. So
but after reading the book, I kind of have an idea of kind of what her take on things is. So kind of been there, done that now. She's going to come out with a new book. I wonder. It's kind of like all the Bart Ehrman books. If you've read one or two Bart Ehrman books, you've pretty much read them all, because it's.
But the funny thing is,
over and over.
There's a lot in Ehrman's text. Ehrman actually, I mean, okay, he's critical.
Yeah.
But if you actually read between the lines, he's technically not hating on Christianity. He's not. No. He's just being critical for the sake of being critical. And Christians do get up in arms, but I've read his works. I find them completely all right. It hasn't hindered my faith. In fact, I've used his works for my defense of the history of, the crucifixion and.
Yeah.
So,
But I'm just saying. Yeah. A lot of his books are kind of it's the same, the same kind of topic. He just kind of reformats them into more books.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I mean. It's not, and I disagree with him, but I'm just as a side point, like a lot of his books are kind of the same thing, but they sell. But so anyway, okay. Well,
I appreciate you coming on.
2.5 hours.
I appreciate also the you took your time to review it. I didn't ask you to review it. I was actually surprised that you're going to review it. Like, again, I like your style, so I was literally going, okay, let's see where Joel goes with this. And
one of the funny thing is like I'll say one more thing. The criticisms of the Twitter hyenas have when anybody says something bad about that book, for example, like, why don't you just take the time to read it and actually engage with it? So I figured that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through it chapter by chapter. And then once I started doing that, those same people are like, she's really, like, you're really obsessed with her. What's their problem? You're like, you can't have it both ways. If you want me to engage with it, I'm going to engage with it, but then don't complain that I'm engaging with it too much, But
then you're not sticking to the Copenhagen interpretation.
Yeah, it's like, well, because I don't
like. Neither are other scholars in the field.
But anyway, but I will say, since we're finishing, I do want to, the people who are watching it, put in a plug. If you are, my blog is Resurrecting.
Yeah, I put your link
you have it on there.
In the description.
I did that, and then also in September, if you want to find my blog, I'll have an announcement when it comes out. I'm coming out with a book called.
So I'll just share
I call myself the blue collar Bible scholar because I worked my way through graduate school as a janitor, and so I kind of always viewed myself that way. There's the thing.
So this is part 1, folks.
Yes, but in September, it's coming out with a book, basically my New Testament reader's guide, my reader's guide to the New Testament, and basically what it is kind of a compilation of everything I put together over my years of teaching Bible at high school and as an adjunct professor. A lot of the academic stuff about biblical studies, quite frankly, for people who don't get into academic, is written too above their head. Most people just want to understand what the heck does Mark mean? What's Paul saying in Colossians or whatever? And so what I do is I kind of try to, it's really a reader's guide. There's commentary stuff in it, obviously, but I take you by the hand. Like for the Gospel of Mark, for example, I give you a little bit of historical background, a little bit of those historical questions, but the most part, go section by section through Mark. Hey, this is what's going on. This is how, getting you to read Mark as a literary whole. It doesn't happen. It's kind of like for the most part, people tend to come to the Bible as if, my example was, let's say you want to read Shakespeare, and instead of actually reading Hamlet, the professor just takes bits and pieces of Hamlet and tries to do other things with it. It's like, I don't know what Hamlet means, And so I think a lot of times when people do biblical studies, they don't sit down and think, okay, what 1 Corinthians as a unit, what's the argument? What's being said as a whole? Mark, Revelation, all these things. And so I really try to help you just read the Bible in the form that it's presented to us as, again, I say to read the Bible as literature. It's about history and all that stuff, but it comes in literary units. You have to learn to read in context. And so I'm coming out with the book, the New Testament Reader's Guide, in September. I'm trying to have a little workbook to go along with it. That should come out in September. And then with any luck, the Old Testament Reader's Guide will come out the next year. And so it's my little thing I'm doing on the side. It's kind of a
I'll give you access to my commentary folder, the commentaries I've been writing. So I've written on Mark, Revelation, right now on Daniel. I'm interested, like, if you have time, just to if you want to skim read through it, and
I'll take a look at it when I can. But so if you
that's awesome.
Keep an eye out for it, that'll come out in September, and hopefully the Old Testament one will come out about a year later. I'm still working on that. It's intentionally not written with academic jargon. It's written in the way I kind of prepared it when I taught high school seniors. I don't want to sound like an academic in these books. I really don't. I mean, I want anybody to be able to read it and go,
your writing style is very easy, like straight to,
I don't write like a PhD guy. That's when you taught high school for 16 years, you realize that's not gonna go well with kids. So good. We'll be looking for that and all that. So so this has been fun.
Sweet.
Down the road, if you want to have me on again for some other topic, we could work out a time.
We can definitely do that. That's for sure.
Get up in the middle of the night, and I'll be in my afternoon.
And for a certain someone in the audience, does this look familiar to you?
I have no idea. Should I know?
Does this look like a face?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
I have no idea. Who
like my background.
Oh, I see your background, but is it?
Yeah. So it's what's called a what grandma meme. So what I did was I pixelated out. Basically grandma, but it's pretty funny. But basically, I purposely chose this meme with respect to the stream because it's like it's a what reaction, like what.
Okay.
Everything we discussed. Anyway, it's an inside joke between me and a few people. So.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well. Yeah.
Sweet. Anyway, thank you so much, Joel. Blessings to you. And anyway, folks, this is like a preliminary discussion review. Joel was the first. He beat me to it, I suppose. So you reviewed the book. I'm still
10 full posts on my blog. Go and read them and have a fun time.
Yeah. And when my review's done, I'm gonna like try and convert that into video form and just I don't want to touch. I mean, to be honest, sometimes I wonder, am I even just wasting my time?
Yeah.
Like, why? Why am I reviewing this? Sometimes I have to wonder. Like, there's so many more productive things I could be doing. Like,
yeah, I did 10 posts on it, so afterward I feel like I need to take a shower, and I'm probably gonna spend my next few posts are probably not going to be biblical. It's probably maybe about some aspect of just actual literature that I like, just to do something different for a month. So, but it's well worth it.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well.
All right. Well, I'm gonna end the stream. So
all right.
I'll see you again next time, folks.
I thought.
You take care.
All right.